You're leaving Canada, but there's a toll booth on the border. Canadians, unlike Americans, you can leave your tax system, but it comes at a cost. Hello, my name is Javier Correa, international tax expert and tax director here at the Rothbard Group, where we help countless Canadians exit the Canadian tax system and essentially relocate to tax-friendly jurisdictions like the Republic of Panama. Now, let's dive right into it. Canadians, unlike Americans, you can actually leave your tax system. A Canadian citizen who was born in, you name it, Toronto, Montreal, Quebec, Edmonton, Vancouver, you guys can actually exit your tax system without giving up your passport, which is a huge advantage over your neighbors to the south, for example, because American citizens, even if they can exit the U.S. physically and access certain tax benefits by operating internationally, American citizens are always considered tax residents of the United States. Whereas you guys in Canada, you guys can keep your passports and not have to deal with the CRA anymore if you leave properly. Now, leaving properly means a lot of things. It means understanding what the CRA considers a Canadian tax resident, which, it's not just spending 183 days in Canada or less than 183 days to be exact. It's more so the ties you keep in Canada, right? So they're looking at the banking, the driver's license, the permanent place of abode. Are you going to a treaty country like, for example, Barbados, or are you coming to the Republic of Panama that lacks a treaty with Canada, so a tax treaty? I mean, there are a lot of things to consider. But among those elements, there is one thing that is often overlooked, especially by local CPAs and lawyers in Canada, which is the departure tax. If you want to leave, you can leave, but you have to pay up in order to leave. So what does that mean? Canadians, if you're planning on leaving, it's as easy as choosing your departure date and essentially exiting the system. And then the following year, when you file your taxes in April, you will file an essentially dual status tax return for the previous year, indicating that you were, let's say, a resident of Canada for, between the months of January and March. And then from April 1st onward, let's say you consider yourself a non-resident. No problem. However, the moment you do that, you will trigger a departure tax, which is essentially a deemed disposition tax in Canada. Now, what is a deemed disposition? A deemed disposition is essentially capital gains on property you haven't sold. Think about it as kind of like a one-time wealth tax, the government's last chance to tax you on your way out. So essentially, the Canadian government is going to look at your assets worldwide, and I mean real estate, with only real estate located in Canada being exempted from this. So real estate located outside of Canada, stocks, jewelry, art collections, automobiles, crypto, you name it. They're going to look at your whole pool of assets. And they're going to consider that you've sold those assets, even if you haven't really sold them, upon departure. That means that by exiting Canada, you will be essentially triggering a massive capital gains tax exposure or obligation, even though you haven't sold any assets, which is why a lot of Canadians who have accumulated wealth leave Canada, and then they suddenly find themselves in a position where they have a bit of a liquidity crunch. They were not expecting to have to pay up such a huge amount of money without actually having sold any assets. Now, there are things you can do in order to minimize the Canadian departure tax. One of the things you can do is you can choose to defer it, although it is a bit of a complex mechanism, but it is technically possible, provided that you have all the necessary elements to provide guarantees to CRA. We have helped clients navigate this process, so it's something that can be done, but it also comes at a cost, because usually banks or institutions that will provide a letter of credit so you can defer your tax will themselves charge fees. So sometimes it's not ideal, but it is something that is within our arsenal. Think about the fact that pre-departure planning is also crucial. So, for example, in addition to deferring the tax, you can also potentially structure your affairs in Canada while you're still a Canadian tax resident in order to make sure you have assets that don't trigger the departure tax, therefore minimizing your exposure. For example, we've had clients that have a lot of capital dividends accumulated in their company, so big capital dividend accounts. And so you can still take advantage of certain tax benefits that are available to you as Canadian tax residents. Make sure that you hold, liquid cash, Canadian real estate in your own name so that, those assets don't trigger the departure tax. And then once you're in that ideal situation in terms of your asset distribution, then you move forward and you leave Canada. Another thing that it could also be strategic is choosing the timing of when you leave Canada, because obviously if you leave Canada, let's say at some point, early in the year, you still have, many months to essentially accumulate wealth tax-free while you're offshore to then pay the departure tax along with your final Canadian tax return the following year after you've exited. So my point here, folks, is Canadians, you can leave, but you have to plan it properly. It's not as easy as saying, I'm grabbing my backpack, I'm grabbing my passport, sayonara CRA, I'm going to Costa Rica, I'm going to have drinks with Javier in Panama, bye-bye, I'm out. I've left the building. It's not exactly how it works. You can leave, but you have to do it properly. And then after you've left, you have to keep in mind that there are certain things that still chase you around. I was having dinner with a Canadian client the other evening in Panama, and he was talking to me about trusts and foundations and so forth. And, I had to remind him there's a 5-year look-back rule where, if you're Canadian and you've recently just left Canada, you might want to hold off on settling a foreign trust or creating a Panama private interest foundation because you might unwillingly trigger some deemed residence rules for that trust or foundation over in Canada, even though you've left. So there are so many things that you have to take into consideration in order to do it properly that you really have to think this through, and you really have to do things with a proper sequence. Tax needs surgical precision, and you can't just do things in an improvised manner. You have to do it properly. So, Canadians, now that you know you can leave, and if you're thinking of leaving for greener pastures and lower taxes and more of a business-friendly environment and nicer weather and lower cost of living, please do so properly. And if you want the guidance of a professional institution like the Rothbard Group, we'd be delighted to work with you. So, if you want more information on the Canadian departure tax and you want to work with me to see what tools are available for you in order to minimize, optimize your Canadian departure tax and relocate to the Republic of Panama and start enjoying the beautiful territorial tax system, look no further. Rothbardgroup.com. And I'll see you in the next time.